Here's a technique I've used a number of times over the years, but I can't really tell you exactly what to do. I can show you how it's done, I can suggest ways to do it, I can even suggest some creative ideas along the way. But it's really a technique for experiment and allowing our creativity free rein. Here's an example of the sort of thing we're going to do. It's basically a simple idea. We cut up one image and then we put it back together, hopefully in a creative way. But because we try things and they don't work and we back away and try other things, perhaps a start to finish video could be quite long if I showed the entire process. But don't worry, I'm not going to leave any stages out. So let me show you what I did and how I arrived at this picture, a portrait that I shot quite a few years ago now. Now we're going to be using quite a number of layers. It's just the nature of the technique. Now as I show you the initial picture I started with, and I just added that little bit of extra border around the edge because I felt I probably would need a little more space. Don't be daunted by the number of layers and groups you can see on the right hand side. I know what it's like when somebody opens up an image like this that you haven't created and suddenly it looks overcomplicated, but it really isn't anywhere near as bad as it looks. But there is one keystroke we're going to need, and it's the one where we select the Move tool from the top of the toolbox and we hit the Control key and click any object on the canvas, and Photoshop will select the layer that object is on. I've covered this in other videos and you'll see it in a few moments. It's a very quick and easy way to identify one layer from among many. Now just before we get started, let me show you some of the artwork we're going to use here. As you'll see, they're all film edges, so I think we can kill two birds with one stone here. I've got the Move tool selected from the top of the toolbox, so if I hold the Control key and click this and drag it up there so you can see it, that is the equivalent of the edge of a 120 piece of film. I'll do the same with this one here and drag that up. You can see I've named that 35mm film times 2 frames. Let's do the same with this one and we'll move that aside. You can see that's just more or less 2 frames but with the center removed. May as well leave that there. This one, as you can see, still holding that Control key and clicking the piece of film so it's selected on the right and I can then move it. This one I've just called a 35mm film, and here we've got a film. Whoops, I picked up the background by mistake there. Let's do that again. Here we've picked up a strip of 35mm film. I'm going to supply all of these and we can use these to help cut up the image in question. So why have I imported all of these? Well, I'm going to use the layers as partly a storeroom as well as a creative place to work. If I just select all of these, I'm going to hold the Shift click method. I'm going to drag them below the white background and the portrait because this is where we're going to start most of our work. So what we need to do first, or what I did first, was I chose a part of the image which I felt needed to be carefully selected, and I picked up the 120 film, that's the one down the bottom here, and I moved it up over the top of the image. Now you can do this with copy and paste if you want, but I think I only used this the once, so on this occasion I'll move it above the image, but we can always copy it in case we want to use it again. Now when we're cutting up an image, particularly a portrait, I think it can be a bit of a problem if we start to cut through parts of the face which then make the model look a little odd. So I wanted to keep mainly the face, mainly something like that, as the centerpiece of my finished image. So what I need to do here is to select the inside edge of my 120 film here and then use that selection to cut out a shape from the portrait beneath, and I believe we've done this in previous presentation videos too. So making sure my 120 film is selected, I'm going to pick up my magic wand tool and I'm going to click within that shape. Now, just to make sure that when I cut out that selection from the young lady beneath, that I don't see any edges along the edge of my black background there, what I'm going to do each time I make a cutout like this is to go to Select, Modify, Expand, and I just want to expand 3 or 4 pixels. We don't need very much, just a little bit. It just makes that selection move out just a touch so we avoid any problems as we go through the rest of the process. Now I need to come back to my layers and I need to select the portrait because I need to copy what's within that selection, and what I'm doing here is going to be exactly the same for any of the other pieces of film and any of the other choices we make. I'll hit Ctrl J. If I turn my portrait off just for a moment, you can see that what we've got here is made up of 2 pieces. We've got the image sitting just below the frame. We've got a couple of options here. What we could do is select both of those and hit Ctrl G, which will group them together. So now I've got both of those in one group, which I can tuck away so we can make the layers a bit more tidy should we need to. We can turn them on and off together, and of course if I decide to rotate or change them, I can change the group and it'll change both together. It's just a personal choice. I think with just 2 sections in there, maybe there's another option. What we could do is just select both of those and just merge them together. But we can actually do that now I've made a group. From the group I can right click the group and I can say merge the group. So now I've got my piece of film and my young lady's face on one layer and we can move on. Now, as you can see by the spinning round of the screen, what I've done is just move forward and done exactly the same with lots of different pieces of film in exactly the same way as I did with the young lady's face. I've chosen to merge both parts of each section together because I think even though the layers looks quite long there, it's not quite so bad as looking at all those groups. And to be honest, this is what I meant in the introduction when I said I can't tell you exactly what to do, because which parts of the image you decide to put in what piece of film is a personal and a creative choice. This was mine. So with the Move tool selected from the top left of the toolbox, I can control click any of the pieces of film you can see on screen and they're instantly selected. You can see that right at the top of the stack there, and I can click and drag to move it, or I can rotate it. That's pretty easy using the free transform tool. The free transform tool in the edit menu will always rotate an individual layer. Don't get it mixed up with image rotation, which will rotate the entire canvas. So in the edit, free transform, Control T, if we bring it up with Control T, it's very quick and easy then to give the sections of our cut up just that nice angle that we think is appropriate. Now, when I started the process of cutting up this image, I had a rough idea of where I was going to head, but part of the fun of the process is we're never entirely sure, and it wasn't until I got to this stage that I thought about using an option which we can use with the transform tool to distort parts of the film. So let me select the film over on the left hand side in the way we've described. There you can see it selected in the middle of the layers on the left hand side. Control T will bring up the free transform, and up the top of the screen I want to go into this option here, because here I can start to distort things a little bit and add a bit of interest with the film that we've created. And when I'm happy with that, I can just hit the enter key to commit that change. Now with the spinning round of the screen, you can see the next stage of the work that I produced using exactly the same technique I just showed with that strip of film, just trying to vary it between each piece, and you'll notice there is one piece that I haven't distorted for, I think, obvious reasons. Now at this point I'm pretty certain I'm not going to need any of those film sections again. It's not essential, but you could highlight all of these and drop them in the bin. As I said earlier on, I am going to supply those, and they're quite useful for this sort of work. Now it goes without saying that what we should do when we're doing this sort of work is save every different stage we've produced. So in other words, we save the original file, we save the first few cutouts that we make, then we save all of the cutouts, all as different files, so that each stage we get to, we've got a quick and easy route back one step should tomorrow we decide to do that. But at this stage I was thinking about putting a drop shadow beneath some of these pieces, but I changed my mind to do something just a little different. Let me control click that piece of film up at the top right, and it's selected in the middle of the layers there. I'm going to make a copy of that, control J. I'm going to select the one that's beneath. First thing I'm going to do is drop the opacity down to about, let's move it just a little bit so we can see it. That looks okay, about 20%. I want to be consistent here, let's try 15. I'll go for 15, but these are the personal choices we're all going to make. But now I'm going to distort that piece of film slightly differently, so control T. I can pick up the distortion at the top there, and I just did things like this just to make it a wee bit different. And once again, with the spinning round of the screen, I've done exactly the same with the other pieces. No different whatsoever. Now, if we look at the layers on the right hand side, it does look rather a mess, doesn't it? A massive string of layers, but as look, we can almost ignore them, can't we? Because if we select that move tool, if I wanted to adjust the position of this piece of film up here, all I've got to do is control click and it'll be instantly selected on the right hand side. I could then use my cursor control keys to nudge it to the right or upwards. So I've got infinite control. Let's select this one, control click. If I just wanted to move the corner away from that other piece of film there, you get the idea. It's all personal, it's very creative, and we need to create something which we are finding appealing. Now, as you can see by the changing of the screen yet again, you can see what my next decision was. It was to add a nice blue colour to all the pieces apart from the lady's face, because blue is a cool colour, her face is a warm colour, and I think they always go quite nicely together. They're more or less opposite on the colour wheel, so they are somewhat complementary. If you want to change the colour of any of these, I can pick any one and I could change the colour even now I've already got it blue, but I'll use the lady's face. I'll control click to select her at the top of the layered stack. We can select control U to bring up our Hue and Saturation palette, but if we go to image, adjustment, there's the one we want, there's the shortcut. All I did was ticked the colorize box, push the saturation up so I could pick the tone of blue that I wanted, because if you go too far it goes into mauve. So we pick the blue we want, then we can temper the saturation to anything we wish. Pretty easy. And even if I did select the one down at the bottom right, and I'll bring it up with control U this time, as you can see, even now I could actually add a couple of other cool colours. That's why this is such a creative process. Now, with this image I showed earlier on, I used these straight lines to link everything together. It sort of, if you like, acts like a reinforcement of the whole. So it worked when I made this image, so I decided to try it with the image I was working on here. It didn't work quite as well as I would like, and that's the nature again of the creative process. We try something, if it doesn't appear to be visually appealing, we back away and try something else. And in the end, I felt the lines that were the most attractive was something pretty simple, as you can see here. Now at this stage I thought of reintroducing the portrait that I have sitting in my layers but now turned off. I'll turn it back on. You can see it needs a bit of a change in size, but just before I do that, the thin line that I put around the outer edge, I created that on a new blank layer, so it is sitting on its own layer, and I just stroked it with just a few pixels in black. So going back to my young lady, selecting the layer and turning it on, I can hit Ctrl T, and I'm going to just drag the top up and the bottom down and a little more. I think I'm going to make it a bit bigger to meet that edge there, something like that. Now if I select my line and pick up my magic wand tool and click, I'm just selecting the outer edge, or I'm selecting the line. If I turn the portrait off, you can see I've just got the inside of that line. So if I wanted to hit Ctrl X now, it's going to cut out the portrait sitting at the bottom of the stack. But if I inverse the selection with Ctrl Shift I or select inverse, now I've got everything but the section in the center selected, and as long as I remember to go back to my portrait and hit Ctrl X, there you can see what we've done. What I need to do here is to drag this down over the white border, and then I started to experiment with, once again, opacity and also color. So now we're really on the home straight, because if we look across to the young lady, you can see I changed her to a similar blue to the rest of the pieces, but I dropped the opacity of this layer down quite a bit. If you look up at the top, you can see it's down to 12%. If I push it up, I feel personally that it starts to impact negatively on the image. I think a very faint amount, somewhere around there, just works for me. But we're all going to choose something different. I brought you into Photoshop's bridge here, and you can see all of the different stages that I saved as I was making the image, starting from the original portrait at the top left to the finished flattened image, which I've called In Pieces. Now I think we could choose almost any image to have a go at this technique. I think we just need to choose one with a fairly strong center of interest, and if we start from that selection, then we can build the rest of the image around that.